So, welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud,
And I'm Art Gelwicks.
and today we're going to be talking in episode 80 about parental protection of devices. And we're going to be covering iOS under screen limitations. We are going to be covering Chromebooks or Google, and we are going to be covering Microsoft. So, the reason of these episodes start when my kid decide to save for a phone. My kid is 10 years old, and I told him I'm not buying a phone, period, until he gets more older. So he looked at me and say, okay, what if I save for the phone? I say, well, if you save for the phone, then I'm willing to pay for your bill. So to give credit to the kid has been saving for over 20 months, and he finally saved enough money to where he can go to eBay and buy a used phone. When he showed me the money, I that was the moment that I went into full parenting mode and said, okay, well, I need to figure out a way to renegotiate this deal. Not because I was afraid to pay for the bill of the phone, but
hmm
because I didn't want a 10-year-old to have a phone. There is no need yet,
hmm
and I don't want him to have. It's much more difficult to limit data that I cannot control versus data that is coming through my Wi-Fi and I can see what is happening. So
hmm
as we begin discussing that, we came to the agreement to buy a Chromebook instead. And to sweeten the deal, I put some money on top of that so he could buy a better Chromebook and he felt like he was getting ahead in the deal. And that's what we did. But that also then, as this happened, he tricked me. He had a MacBook, okay, and he tricked me not in a bad way, but he convinced his grandfather to give him as a present a license for Windows because he wanted to play some of the games on Steam and things like that the MacBook
Okay.
will not run the same. So grandpa for his birthday gave them a Windows license. So suddenly my kid turned to have three devices: an iPad,
hmm
a MacBook, okay, that I installed Boot Camp so he could run Windows on it, and a Chromebook.
hmm
That then brought into the interesting thing, okay, this kid has more devices than most people have, but how I'm going to limit and protect what he wanted to do. But it also gave me the opportunity to really evaluate and play with the parental controls of them. Most of what I have done, it's been on iOS because that's where I live with. So that's what create or initiate the idea of this episode. And before we go into more discussion, I'm going to say I'm very impressed and I'm very happy with the Chromebook more than any of the other two platforms. And the Chromebook allowed me to do something that I did. We create a school profile and we create what he called a gamer profile. And then the school profile, I could block YouTube and these kind of things, and he can access that thing 24/7, no issues, no concern, because it's basically blocked to anything that is not a school or it's blocked. And on the other one, he can do his stuff, but then I can use these parental controls. That is something that multi-user is something I have complained on the iPad for the longest time because I cannot do that. That was initially the reason he got that old MacBook. It's an old MacBook and a vintage MacBook, as Apple called them. Okay. The
Okay.
reason he got that vintage MacBook was so he could have, that limited and access to school while he played on his iPad. So that said, this is a story of how this episode came up, but let's go a little bit into the parental controls and why
hmm
um, and then we will go more into details.
Yeah, I haven't actually played with parental controls in quite some time because all of my kids are grown. Uh, the closest I've gotten to them is interacting a little bit for my grandson. But I've worked a lot, especially, and I use them all the time, are the other types of controls that are included in that kind of block, especially within the Android space, within the digital well-being and the parental controls, being able to create profiles, being able to create routines that allow you to manage access to certain things at certain times. And from a parental standpoint, it makes logical sense. You're trying to keep kids out of things that they shouldn't be doing. You're trying to keep them from purchasing applications they shouldn't be purchasing. Uh, that type of a dynamic is absolutely built in. And Google has done an excellent job of integrating that in, not only into Android, but also in the Chromebooks, which makes logical sense because Chromebooks are so education heavy. Same with
Mhm.
Apple. Apple has provided some excellent parental control capabilities. From a productivity standpoint, and specifically what we deal with, I think there's a lot of things within this that we can take advantage of, even if kids aren't part of the equation, for our own benefits. And you were talking about it just a few minutes ago, having multiple profiles, being
Mhm.
able to have different logins. You can do it on, like I said, you can do it on just about any devices except for an iPad. I don't know why. Um, I think that's the case. I don't know. I don't use them. But being able to have those different accounts and then set things up so that, okay, this is what I'm going to be using during the day for work, sign in on the work account, and things like the games and that sort that you may use for entertainment later on are not available. Now, this is really applicable if you have devices that are doing double duty, if they're acting specifically as you're using them as personal as well as professional devices. If you have dedicated professional devices, they kind of have built-in controls in them, often from whoever's providing your IT services. But if it's your own equipment, if you're the IT person, looking at these types of controls can be really useful from a productivity standpoint because they give you that option to say, okay, I may not have the level of discipline necessary to not open Instagram a couple times during the working day. That dopamine hit I get from scrolling through that is just too much, and I'm going to go tap on that icon and I'm going to lose 20 minutes for that. I'm going to let the operating system control that for me. And I like that. Again, it does provide a challenge to personal discipline because in most cases, for example, things like digital well-being on Android, if you set a timer on an application to say you can only use that application for X amount of cumulative time during a day, when you start getting to the end of that, it will tell you, hey, you've got 5 minutes left. But it also gives you an option. Do you want to add 10 minutes to that? Do you want to basically snooze that cutoff? Um, so that requires a bit of self discipline that it's less than what it takes to not run it at all, but it's more than it completely locking it down. And honestly, I don't know of many cases where you 100% want to lock an application down to a specific time period because heaven knows you might have to use it later on for some reason or have to
But,
look up something.
but I have done this to many of my clients, and I have done this to myself. I have done with my clients is, what is the weakness on your phone? Oh, it's Facebook. Oh, it's Instagram. It's email. Okay. And then let's set those things so you can only do half an hour of email in the phone. It's not that you will not be able to add more time, but now you are conscious. For my clients who they feel they get sucked up into this email, friend, and they're on the phone and say, and suddenly 2 hours happen because I was looking at emails on my phone. Then let's limit it. Let's put a 15-minute.
Hmm.
So you will get the alert and you can said, okay, let me know in 15 more minutes. And then in 15 more minutes, your screen will be blocked again and ask you again, do you want to give more 15 minutes? And you can do it unlimitedly, but you are conscious of those stops. I have that. There are certain hours in the day in which I have blocked the reader application, the Amazon Kindle.
Hmm.
Why? Because I love to read. So I can open a book and suddenly it's half an hour happened and I should have been doing this. And I had 5 minutes, that is what I was going to read, and end up reading,
Hmm.
you know, 27. So I have that thing. So there is a 2 minute, okay, and after 2 minutes, it automatically told me before 6 p.m. that
Hmm.
I get just 15-minute slots, and it works incredibly well because then it's a different decision. It is not I waste or I didn't notice it was 45 minutes. Is no, you were interrupted and you make three conscious decisions of extended for 15 more minutes. And that's very, very useful for the
Yeah,
adults.
well, for adults and for kids as well. I mean, you can, excuse me, you can leverage for whomever, you can leverage the capabilities. I'm looking at the modes and routines inside of
Yes.
Android right now, and having an option, they have by default several modes that are available that you can configure. Sleep, theater, driving, exercise, relax, and work. And keeping in mind that a tablet and phone is sharing the same operating system, so there's certain things here you're like, I probably would not have my tablet in the theater, um, but being able to have that routine that you can execute can be really useful. And for example, like the relax routine in here, you can configure it so that it would kick on at sunset, for example, and it basically blocks all the unnecessary messages and notifications you would get from other apps so that the only thing you're going to focus on are things that you can
Mhm.
relax. If you're having a difficulty separating work and non-work time, that's a good way to do it. That's a good way to take advantage of the operating system's capability of filtering and sorting what's coming to you, and use that to kind of plan your time a little bit better, and break your day out. Not to the level of like a time blocking breakout, but just understanding that, in the morning, or for example, in the evening, I don't want to get work emails. I don't want to get notifications of work emails. I should, best practice, be ignoring those until the next time I'm actually working. So I can use those kinds of routines to do that. And it requires some planning and some forethought and honestly some trial and error to get
Mhm.
these set up in a way that they're going to work for you. And honestly, your setups may change over time. I know for a fact that mine have changed frequently. I'll look at how it's set up, and I'll add an app in or I'll take an app out. Um, Part of this really comes from looking at the metrics that these systems provide. For example, on Android, the digital well-being system will tell you everything about the apps as you've been using them. So they'll tell you which apps you've been using, frequently, how long you've used it, how much compared to the day before have you used your phone or your apps. And having that insight helps you educate the system on, well, this is what I really should be doing, and it creates that visibility. We always get this. We'll download a new application, we'll have that bright shiny thing, and it'll chew up a huge amount of time in the very beginning because we're learning that application, we're fascinated by it. And sometimes you don't have a perspective as to how much time you're actually spending on it, especially if it's
And
on a mobile device.
and that gets even challenging when you talk about your kids, 1, 3, or 7, or doesn't matter the number of devices, okay, because
Mhm,
they get sneaky as we did. I mean, okay, as I told them, remember, I invented that game. Okay, may have not been the same technology, but trust me, I did a version of that.
mhm,
And and they do, and they try to be sneaky, and they try to figure it out how they can get 15 more minutes, and in the same
mhm.
way that we did it. Okay, I read,
Yeah,
I love to read, and again, I have a flashlight, okay, that I turn it off
flashlight
if
under the
I
covers in bed. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I did that, okay, and I closed the door, and when I hear noise, I turn the light off, hopefully that they didn't see it under the door. Okay, I
Mhm,
put towels under the door so they don't didn't see it. I did all that too. It was a different world, yes, but we did it. I mean, I remember connecting. My parents got a Sony portable TV. And I'm not going to admit how many hours we spent trying to figure it out how to connect the Nintendo to that TV so we could play at night.
sure.
Okay. Why? Because the Nintendo was easy to hide in the room, and that TV was
Mhm,
small enough that you can put it under the blanket. So you put the blanket, and now, okay, that's
mhm.
probably one of the reasons I use glasses today. I'm going to say, but okay. they we did that in the same way they did, and it's very useful to know. One of the things that these applications make that, interestingly, I have not yet discovered how to make it easy on Google. In the iPhone, the iOS, as well as Windows, it's very easy for me to go and say, give the kid this 15 minutes more for this application. Okay, but don't change
Oh, okay.
my settings. In the family for Google, it's not that easy to do. Okay, I need to modify
Mhm.
the settings every time, and I have not spent honestly enough time researching, but it is kind of annoying. But as that part is annoying and maybe a matter of lack of research,
Mhm.
the other part is very powerful. The profiles are very powerful. The notifications are very powerful. I know exactly what he has tried to download, access. I can block from
Mhm.
my phone websites and everything. And I will say, out of the parental options, for what I have experienced, Google is years ahead of Microsoft and iOS. And actually,
Yeah.
if I put them in order, will be Google, Microsoft, and then iOS or Apple. Um, and the advantage on the Microsoft side, obviously, is the fact that you can control the PC and you can control the Xbox. So that make it very, very interesting if you have those devices. But from the parental controls, the granularity that you get from the Android side, it is very, very interesting and very, very, very powerful.
Yeah,
From
Microsoft has added in things like their Family app, which
mhm.
do give you improved controls. But I think you're right. I think Google is still significantly ahead of them in that kind of aspect control. There's also, this is one of the advantages of the Android platform. There's a lot of third-party applications out there that provide the
Mhm.
same types of controls. They're not integrated at the operating system level, but they can provide that same functionality. And for some reason, I'm recalling that there's at least one or two of them out there that kind of gamify the access to apps. So, for example, uh, tying it into the equivalent of earning an allowance. You do certain jobs, you do certain chores, you can earn X amount of minutes, and that can be added into the app so that you have those minutes to consume on applications. I've seen, for
Yeah,
some reason, I recall
Apple
that
as
there's at least a
Apple,
couple that do that.
Amazon, Amazon do something like what you are describing on their Kindle tablets. So you can say, okay, if the kid reads X, you can give them X amount of screen time and for watch videos and things like that. That that I think is very nice. It's a way to gamify. We never really got into the Android tablets, um, but I know you can. I know you can configure. Um, for us, the Kindles in our household, the Kindles are the readers, and I just get the readers, and the kids has have them for very long time, basically because our argument is that's the only electronic you can bring to your room at night. So if you're going to
Mhm.
stay up because you don't want to sleep because, well, they are kids, and that's what the argument every parent has with their kids, then you can read on your Kindle. And Kindle has a program. They have a For older kids, they have their own Kindle Unlimited, but for younger kids, they have a kids unlimited version full of books. So that gives me the opportunity to give them access to a bunch of books without me necessarily buying them, and they can browse and download and all that. So I know, for example, my son
Mhm.
has read the big Nates and books like that for hours of hours of hours, and because he don't need to call, even that I can go log in and see the report, but because he don't need to come and ask, can you put me another
Mhm.
book, then he feels sneaky in the sense that, oh well, I'm reading now until 10, and well, I'm willing to let that slide, with a smile
Mhm.
under the rug.
Looking at the Microsoft Family Safety app, just in their information, it looks like it supports Windows, Android, and Xbox, which is kind of nice. And it does allow the kids to do requests for additional time on apps, providing direct access to apps, reporting back, what their usage and thing is. And these are kind of the price of admission type of features that you would expect out of any parental control application. From a
Yeah, and
productivity standpoint,
it
yeah,
is important to say on
go
the
ahead.
Microsoft application, it support Android phones. So if you get a tablet
Yes,
like what we did, that is a Chromebook Android tablet, that will not be supported by that app.
gotcha. And that makes it kind of makes sense from a Microsoft standpoint, not good sense, but it's consistent with their actions and behaviors. Uh, their support for Android tablets is probably the bottom of their priority structure as compared to
Mhm.
Android phones. Um, so when you start to look at some of these application controls and things like that, it kind of makes sense. Plus, Android tablets still are, well down on the pile when it comes to accessibility and adoptability within the general populace. I mean, people get iPads. That's kind of the way it is still, and
Yeah.
I think it will be for a long time. So when you're using, let's think about not so much on the protection side of the equation, but how can we use these tools to help us really be more effective? I mean, I know we've talked about so far about identifying applications that are becoming time sucks, maybe unintentionally, especially those applications that you tend to bounce in and out of a lot. So they wind up being cumulative time sucks. I think
Mhm.
using tools like digital well-being and the other tools on the other platforms to recognize that accumulated time can be really useful. But are there other parts of the that space that you use personally to help you out?
So for me, I live again. I'm live on iOS. iOS devices is what I carry when I do. So I screen time to limit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit. Go ahead. Your video's stuck. There you
Can you
go.
hear me? I think my internet went out for a second. Okay.
Yeah, you bounced
Okay.
briefly.
Sorry.
I,
I
you're
was
back now.
saying I live on an iOS. I love in an iOS environment. So the applications that I limit are little. So there are two things I use. Okay. We have what is called focus. Okay. And I use that when I need to reduce distractions. So I do I try to do daily mass. So it is designed so when I get to daily mass, it automatically gets into focus mode and I don't get any notification or anything until I leave that location. That's one of those that is automatically as soon as it has programs
Hmm.
time that I do that and it blocks. I have one for the Kindle and the books and the comics and as well as Feedly. Okay, because otherwise I can open that application and just read. And I'm not saying reading is bad, I'm just saying it's bad when you're not conscious that you can read 3 hours in the middle of the day, and I'm guilty of that.
Hmm.
So because of that, I have those limit, and it's basically Kindle, books, Comic Flow, Libby, Feedly, and Instapaper. Okay, those five are blocked, and I kind of unblock that and say, give me 15 minutes. That 15-minute warning is enough for me to decide, yes, I'm going to continue reading, or no, I need to stop. And I have used that for clients, and I have seen clients set it up with mail. I have see clients set it up to social media applications, Facebook and Instagram and those kinds, because again, it's not about not accessing the application, it is about giving yourself the nudge that you have more than X amount of time already into that application. And then
Mm-hmm.
you can make the conscious decision. Many years ago, and even when I wrote 25 Tips for Productivity book, I put in there and I took my solution 20 years ago was to learn to work in two browsers. Okay, one for
Mm-hmm.
professional, one for personal. And the reason for that was that it was not about not navigating, it was about making a distinction when you are working, when you are playing, so your brain could know one or the other.
Yes.
Now it's even nicer because you can nudge your brain and say, hey, you have been working on this email screen for the last 15 minutes. You want 15 minutes more. And as I work with clients, sometimes the correct answer is yes. And sometimes the correct answer is, oh, it's 15 minutes already. No, let me move to the computer, to the iPad, to the bigger screen, and
Mm-hmm.
continue doing the email that I'm doing, but in a device where I can move and be more efficient. So,
Mm-hmm.
and we have talked about this in the show. What is the device that you are efficient? And sometimes about getting that nudge and say, wow, I've been spending 15 minutes here on my phone. Let me pull the iPad or let me pull the Mac, let me pull the PC and continue working there because obviously I am in a role, but let me use these little things as nudge. Things that I have used the focus again. I live on iOS, and my clients, most of them live on iOS, is to separate that personal professional notifications. And I have a lot of clients
Mm-hmm.
who use that, okay, between 6 and 8 p.m., okay, switch to a professional, sorry, to a personal profile. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because it's not that you don't want to have, you want to minimize the distraction for work. Why? Because you've been working 8 hours. It's very hard to break that. Reduce the notifications, then turn it on again at 8. I have many of my
Sure.
clients who just turn them. I had a client who had a very interesting setup on his iPad, on his iPhone. Sorry, his iPhone is his main device. He live on an iPhone. He
Mm.
don't have. He have a Mac that live in the office, and he don't take it with him. He live on a phone, but his phone is set up for personal in the morning where he basically or professional in the morning where he limits personal interaction and notifications and all that, and then at noon it open until 4 p.m. and at 4 p.m. it turns into personal phone, and then between
Mm-hmm.
4 and 9, okay, the notifications and stuff from professional are reduced almost to zero, except very key people that he wants to pass through those filters. And then at 9 p.m., everything gets open again. And what he said when we set it up was that allows me to do a lot of focus work in the morning. Okay. In the
Mm-hmm.
afternoon, allows me to be present on my whole world, my personal as well as my professional. And then when I get home, my phone is not vibrating and beeping because work is continue happening. But then if I not at 9 p.m. when the notifications, come back to my whole world, if I still have horsepower, if I want to still work,
Mm-hmm.
I can grab that device and work whatever I want. But I have give appropriate attention to work and appropriate attention to my personal life. So, as many things we have discussed in here, this is very customizable to what you need. What is your work style? How you need it to be more efficient? And as we have said in this show many times, the secret of this, the cross platform, is what works best for you. And the parental, yeah, they're called parental security things, but it's really what can you do to make it better? What can you do
Mm-hmm.
to help you work smarter?
Yeah, it's no different than if you had a human assistant who was in charge of controlling these different aspects. You would give them guidance on, look, I don't want to work on that kind of stuff until after lunch. I don't want to be
Mhm.
disturbed by this kind of stuff during this period. And we have to take it a little bit further because the tools like digital well-being uh, give us a good framework to define, but often I think you can take it further if you start to look at some of the automated routines that the operating systems provide you access to, where you can literally on demand say, hey, I'm just going to work on email now. And you define an email mode that locks
Mhm.
everything else down and allows you to focus just in that, or a reading mode. Um, I haven't tried it, but I've made a note for myself to see if there are ways to control the visibility options, not just suppressing them. Um, I know within the Android one, at least specifically on my tablet, if an application is temporarily locked out because it's been used too much, for example, it grays out the icon. It's the icon's still there, but it grays it out, which means that, well, maybe I can do some more things to it. Um, so I have to wonder, at what point are we putting too much effort into too much effort into creating these artificial guide rails when we should be saying, okay, I'm just going to have the self-discipline to do it? Is there a line for that, or is that just a way of going back to an old school of thinking of, just suck it up and deal with it?
Well, I am going to answer this in a very long way. And when I work with clients about productivity for their families and their kids, okay, and I had a client once, as we were setting up an OSBI for their family, okay, and we were setting up. I have I have shared. I think so. Basically, I teach the clients to not only set up the routine but also set up the rules. What are the
Mhm.
consequences? And those consequences need to be in writing. Why? Because when they're not in writing, this is what happened. Okay, you have a bad day of work, and kid do A, and then you react, okay, based it on your bad day of work. Why? Because you're human. Okay, that's the only reason you're doing that. But then 2 days later, kid did A again, and today you're in a great mood. So A, oh well, it doesn't seem like a big deal. Who cares? But for the kid, what that creates is that every time he do A, he don't know if he's going to find Mount Vesuvius on fire or lenient dad that who doesn't care, and that
Yeah,
really create issues for the kid. So
sure.
one of the things we work is into codify these things. Okay, my kid, for example, has, hey, if there is C's on your digital report card, because that thing is updated during the semester, the moment there is a C showing up, you lose access to all electronics unless it's for schoolwork. Okay, that in this case,
Okay.
as we have said
Hmm.
today, that means he has only one profile. But that is written down. There is no discussion if it was a B minus or a B. No, no, it's written down. So those kind of things work very well. And that's one of the things I do. And I had a client tell him one,
Hmm.
well, but the problem with that is that basically you are transactionalizing my relationship with the kid. And when he said that, I stop and think for a moment and say, you're right, I am. But this is the problem. You may have 20 transactions with your kid a day, maybe it's
Hmm.
10. So which ones are you going to pick to have? Pick the thing, clean the room, do these 20 responsibilities that you have on the list, or are you going to codify those so you can have 19 times where you can tell him how much you love him, how much proud you are, how well they're doing, and other interesting
Hmm.
things. Because otherwise, those 10 interactions are about those responsibilities. They're annoying for you and for them, by the way. It's not, it's for you as a parent and for them as a kid. So in this case, it's the same thing. We have only a certain amount of things in which we can exert self discipline. So are you
Okay.
want to wasting those opportunities of self discipline into not open Instagram or into not eating the chocolate cake?
I can't disagree with the idea of equivalent transactionalization, because when you have, I mean, I've got three kids, all grown, and I remember going through those stages of it being a negotiation. If you want something positive, you need to do this thing. And that's life. I mean, that's nothing new to anybody.
Correct.
Being able to have a system where, and it wasn't as prevalent when my kids were growing up. Nowadays, it's actually more prevalent because kids are more comfortable with, the app level technology. It wasn't as heavy, but being able to say, do this, you get that. Do this, you get that. Does Some people will argue, and I think you've heard this, that it takes away from that interaction. I say no. I agree with you. I think those are interactions that can be commoditized because if they know the rules and they know the expectations and you've set the expectations clearly, then yeah, it can be that give and take. And when things go off the rails, when something has to change, then you have that emotional capital, for lack of a better term, to be able to spend on that interaction with your child and be able to sit down and say, okay, this is not working in this case. Why is this not working for you in this case? And I think you find, parents and kids are their relationships are always different. You'll find some kids that thrive in that kind of transactional model. There are certain kids that just love the idea of, okay, if I do this, I get that. I do this, I get that. And then there are other
There are
kids that
others that don't care
thrive
for
on,
that.
well, they don't care for it. And then they're the ones that thrive on gaming the system. They love to find the ways to manipulate the system and come up with creative alternatives and find the loopholes. And I'll argue that those are skill sets and those are aspects of their personality that you want to nurture just as much as the ones who are doing the transactional processing.
Mhm.
Every child has those unique aspects, and this can be a lens into their thinking if, and this is the if both sides are willing to play fair within this structure. So, for example, if it is transactional and you commit to doing something, as you were talking at the beginning of the show, you had committed to getting a phone. You weren't thrilled about the idea after the fact, so you kind of upped the ante, took it to a Chromebook, you kicked in a little bit for that. That's fair. It's not that you can't have that. I'm not going to go back on it, but I'm going to upgrade the deal. We're going to
Correct.
improve the contract here, and I think that's realistic and that's reasonable, and it gives them a way to carry out into the world. And I think if we're able to have that relationship and conversation with ourselves around how we're using these types of digital well-being and controlling applications for our interactions on these devices, which for the most part, you look at a lot of the applications on these devices, they are designed specifically to be time sucks. They are designed to tie us up. They are designed to stay in our face the whole time. And we're trying to put limitations on something that doesn't want to have limitations. And we have to be fair with ourselves and say, okay, I'm going to set TikTok to be available not more than 30 minutes a day. Great, that's fine. But I have to stick to that. I have to say, when the system says you got 25 minutes left, yeah, I'm going to stop. And I'll save that 5 minutes for later in case I absolutely need it. But I have to be fair with myself. And that takes a level of self discipline that can take a long time to develop. It may never actually develop, but it's one of those things I think if we're fair with ourselves, we can say, okay, I chose this. I do have the option to unchoose it, but I know that it's for my well being. It's eating your vegetables. I mean, it's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, have you had, not only from your own kids, but other, anecdotally from other parents and things like that, have you heard pushback from kids around these kinds of tools where they say, "Oh, I'm not going to do that. Why are you locking everything down? Why are you making life so difficult?"
Yes, and from my own as well as others, as well as clients, kids. Okay. Or you get these people, this guy to make our life so difficult. And my experience with that, and many of my clients agree in this, has come to what I was saying before: is the lack of consistency what the kid is going to expect from the parent. And as I said, your kids were old, but is or are old. But if you think on your kids when they were kids, okay, younger, okay, if they stay, because again, it was a different time, but if they most likely play outside much more than what my kids have played outside, and they knew exactly as soon as the light, was getting dark, they needed to come
Mhm.
in. But if the consequence for not coming in, okay, was different every time, okay, that create a distrust for the kid. And that's what not intentionally most parents have created. Because
Yeah.
when you don't have that consistency, now, if you do A, this is the consequence, and the consequence is always the same. The only way that is the same is that it's in agreement prior, in writing. That's what I recommend. Why? Because then you and your kid know exactly what is the distance of that. And I can tell you a story with my own kid that was very funny. When he got his, the only C he has got on his uh, thing, he came and his
Hmm.
mother saw the C, and his mother and I, and he had a conversation. Okay. And mom forgot about the prior agreement and went to be mom. Okay. Worried mom. Okay.
Hmm.
So when I got home, he looked at me and say, "We need to talk." And the poor kid rolled his eyes and say, "I've been talking to mom for the last 2 hours." And I say, "I understand, but you and I need to talk."
Hmm.
So we sit on the couch, and I told him, "Bring your iPad." So he brought his iPad and said, "Look at the rule that we create." And he said, "I know what is the rule." And I say, "That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to get the iPad and search for the rule." So he did and say, "Read the rule." "Well, this says about the C's." "No, no, read the rule." And so working with
Hmm.
that, he read the rule and said, "Okay, is you have any questions?" "No." And I said, "Okay, then we are in agreement that until that C disappear from Power School, you are going to have no iPad, and the iPad is going to live here in the living room." "Yes." "Okay, then please collect the iPad,
Hmm.
put it in there. That's all that we need to talk, unless you have questions." After that conversation, he came back the next day and said, in his way, making how different the conversation was between my wife and I. And it's
Hmm.
not because one was better than the other. It's just the standard is the other conversation where the parent gets emotional. Hey, we get emotional. It's not that I didn't want to tell
Hmm.
him things. It is that having that codified allows that our discussion, our conversations are not on things that can be solved very easily. And
Hmm.
that allows us at the same time to then sit and talk about books. Why you are not reading? What book do you want to read? Why we don't
Hmm.
buy another book? That are things that I am way more interested in him to learn him than why you're getting a C in whatever is he got a C. So that's something that I said that one of the things of productivity, and I've been saying this for years, is using your intelligent self to help your dumb self. Okay. And that is the reason you do productivity. You don't do productivity so you can do more stuff. You do productivity to help your dumb self down the road when you get all emotional or tired or those
Hmm.
kind of things, to look and say, "Oh, buy bread." Okay, that's and there is no difference with this. And yes, the kids fight with this, and they fight why I cannot get to. I can't tell you how many times my kids has walked into my office and say, "Can I have YouTube?" Okay, but when the answer is, "What is the rule?" Okay, he
Hmm.
walk away. Okay, and he knows what is the rule, and there is no argument. But the rule need to be consistent, and that's where we parents fail the most.
Well, and I think it's interesting as we build this towards our normal topic area of personal and professional productivity, because what this is teaching on both sides is the importance of clear expectations.
Hmm.
We are creating a set of clear expectations around if you do certain things, these are the things that will happen. And then having those happen and
Hmm.
preventing I want to say the fungibility of emotional discourse in the conversation. You know, you're frustrated with the kid, you're frustrated with the work, they start to cop an attitude with you. It's very easy to emotionally overreact and
Right.
overcorrect a behavior. But if you've got this established, clear expectation and you stick with it can definitely work to your advantage. It won't work for every kid, nothing never does. But it certainly can make your life easier because
Nothing never does that.
no, it never does. I mean, it changes
No.
by the day. Uh, and it changes by the kid too. But when you think about that context, and I've had conversations with parents before about the same thing about, well,
Hmm.
I want to put limits on the applications and, my kids are pushing back and I said, okay, try this. And this has worked in some instances, not all, but it's worked in a few. I said, look,
Hmm.
if you're going to have to put limits on some of their applications, let's say Minecraft, for example, you're capped to an hour a day. Fine. If they're really pushing back, you can turn this into an exchange and say, okay, I understand you really want to play this. So I'm going to do it this way. We're going to cap Minecraft at an hour in a day. But you also get to choose one of the applications that I do all the time for my entertainment, and we'll cap it at an hour a day as well, just so I can feel what you're feeling. So I
Hmm.
understand that. And you can see how I react to that. I know some kids that's worked with because they kind of feel like, Goose is getting what the gander's getting. Yeah.
Right.
It's sometimes at least gets them into that mindset. Often they get myopic enough and they're like, oh, I don't care what you've got. I want my stuff. And then you can work out other relationships and arrangements around those structures. But it is important to have those clear expectations. And I think by setting that tone early and also setting that tone with ourselves. For example, if we put a limitation on an application that it's only going to be available for an hour a day for ourselves, we have to have the second part of that conversation ready. When this thing stops working because I've run out of time on it, what should I be doing? What am I
Hmm.
doing that this is taking the place of? What is the gap that's filling in? And social media is a great example of that.
Yep.
Why is spending 3 hours scrolling through TikTok? What is that taking the place of that I conceivably want to or should be doing in its place? And if I'm going to put a cap on that, it's not go find something to fill that space. It's go do something that's worthwhile. And I need to
Hmm.
have those structures in place so that when that switch flips, I can just move right into it. And you can also use it as a reward. I mean, if you set, let's say, your favorite app, your book reader, you set it for a total of an hour a day, well, maybe it's 10-minute segments. You combine that with a timer to say, okay, I'm going to spend 10 minutes reading now, as part of my break. You go into that app and you set that 10-minute, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, I don't overuse it. I don't abuse it. I learn to rationally control the interactions with the app, and I get a better sense as being able to start and end things, which I think is
Right.
one of the challenges that so many of us have is getting something rolling. And then once we get something rolling, getting out of it again and into something else. It can be very difficult. So these are all tools that we have available to us. They may not be specifically designed for these features or this kind of approach, but I think if we apply a little bit of creativity to them, they can really work out to help us out.
That is correct. And again, in in many of these parental controls, I agree with you in what you said. It's something I have not thought about it, but it is true. Let me show you that is fair, and let me show you what I feel, and maybe that may may make me react in a different way or renegotiate this in a different way. Um, but I think, but I'm coming back to, and but then in order for that you mentioned to work, you go back to that consistency. So you cannot, because now you are the admin, set at 9 p.m. Oh, let me give you another 15 minutes, because then that trust gets broken. And the moment that trust gets broke, that's it. And
Mhm.
that is very, very important too.
Yeah, that it is truly a trust-based relationship that we're
Hmm.
establishing with these devices, with ourselves and with our kids. Because at the end of the day, the device, there is no parental control that replaces the parent part of the equation. That's the reason why they're called parental controls. I mean, they are there for you to supplement what you're doing with your child, what you're doing
Hmm.
with your inner child or yourself. Um, so don't look to them to do the job for you, because they won't, and you'll be sorely disappointed, and you'll be frustrated, you'll be upset, and bad things will happen. You have to
Hmm.
recognize that they are a tool, no different than a car or anything else. They won't they won't do it for you. You need to still drive. You need to set your tone. And the other thing I'll just throw in here real quickly is don't let anybody tell you, well, you should be using it this way, and why aren't you doing it this way? No, learn the tool, like we always say, decide for yourself. You can research, absolutely research, look into how other people are using it. But don't let somebody tell you that there's only one right way to apply these things, as is the same with
Right.
any of these tools.
Like with same with any of these tools or any of the things we have discussed in here. So with that, follow us where you like to listen to podcasts, like us, subscribe to us, and leave us a review. You can also interact with us on PersonalProductivity.club. And hey, bring your ideas, bring the
Yeah.
questions, the ideas. You know what? This is what I've been doing with these parental controls for me, for the kid, for others. And in the meantime, we are Augusto Pinaud and Art Gelwicks, and see you next time from your favorite device. Thank you.